Welcome to National Pension Partners, where retirement planning meets peace of mind. Today, we're diving into the 412(e)(3) plan, also known as a fully insured pension plan. This isn't just any retirement plan. It's the gold standard for stability and guaranteed benefits. How does it work? Simple. It's funded exclusively by life insurance and annuity contracts. This means no market risks, no actuarial assumptions, just ironclad guarantees. Think of it like this. You're a small business owner who hates surprises. The 412(e)(3) plan gives you predictable, stable contributions every year. Your future benefits are backed by insurance contracts, so you know exactly what you're getting. No guesswork, no headaches. But there's more. These plans are designed to maximize your contributions and offer significant tax advantages. And with National Pension Partners, you're not just getting a plan, you're getting a team of experts, attorneys, CPAs, actuaries, all dedicated to making your retirement as secure as possible. We provide personalized consulting, ensuring that your plan is tailored to your specific needs. Best part? Initial consultations and proposals are absolutely free. $0, zero commitment. So if you want a retirement plan that's as reliable as your morning coffee, head over to nationalpensions.com. With the 412(e)(3) plan, your future is in safe hands. Retirement planning never sounded so thrilling. Perfect for small business owners who like their finances as predictable as Monday mornings. Stable contributions, ironclad guarantees, and serious tax advantages. It's the trifecta of financial security. And with National Pension Partners, you get a team of brainiacs, attorneys, CPAs, actuaries, ensuring your retirement is as secure as Fort Knox. Oh, did we mention the free consultations? That's right. You get a personalized expert proposal with $0 down. So, if you want a retirement plan that's as reliable as your morning coffee, head over to nationalpensions.com. Because when it comes to your future, boring is the new exciting. Retirement planning never sounded so thrilling. For more details, check out National Pension Partners at nationalpensions.com. Retirement planning never sounded so thrilling.
It looks like it's on me. We're going to talk about media. I've got Rick Rosner with me, and I've got other folks here as well. I guess definitely Nick started, and maybe Nick will come back as well. But we're going to see what's going on and all along those lines. And definitely one of the things I guess I'll talk about really quickly is apparently we know that Senator John Fetterman and Katie Britt were recently on the news because they were introducing something called the Stop the Scroll Act to target social media harm. So this apparently is something that's going on, and I know people have talked about this idea of wanting a mental health warning label for social media platforms and all along those lines. So it'll be interesting to see what folks have to see about this idea of putting the social media kind of notices, kind of like what they do with cigarettes and other things, and trying to dictate how folks react and all along those lines. I'll bring Rick in and see what he's got to say about this idea of having some ideas of some social media warnings, because that's something that apparently John Fetterman has had some run-ins with the media, and we'll bring in Shaquille, see what he's got to say about this idea as well. But what are our thoughts about this notion of wanting to have labels on social media, and does John Fetterman need to be pushing this idea? So
sure. I mean, okay, yeah, put a label on it. I don't know it'll change anything, but like, Americans, 2/3 of Americans are fat because food is cheap and delicious. And we're fat on social media too. I spend so much, I waste so much of my life, so much of every day on, on Twitter, and just like, I can't get off. I'm addicted. Because it's freaking delicious. It's stuff to argue about. So I don't know how you change people's behavior.
what's your take on that, Shaquille?
I can't relate. I smoke and drink, so perhaps I've got different different addictions to Rick. Nice work, Nick. Start the show. Leave us all backstage. Well done.
The thing
Don't go blaming Spain's internet either.
Well, since you bounced, I was just asking people because apparently Fetterman has
he's
got this
frozen.
idea of
okay, wait, time out. I can explain everything, as he said in what was the name of that movie? Anyway, I can explain everything. My computer's having jet lag. In other words,
Yeah.
what happens is all my settings are in Eastern time on the computer, and I set everything up on Central time in Europe. And the problem is the computer didn't react to that, and so the things that still thinks it's Eastern time. So when I do my settings, I'm going to have to put everything back on Eastern time. So this way, I'll be able to link to LinkedIn and everything else. So the real problem is the computer is on Eastern time. I'm in Central time, and my computer is suffering from jet lag. I didn't know computers got jet lag, but they do.
Well, I travel all over the world, and I haven't had those issues. But I still hold you
Have you
responsible
had
for
those
blowing up
issues?
my computer in one of our backstage chats. But look, Buck, I'll come to your question. Look, I don't think warning labels help at all. I think that perhaps more education about the harms and maybe some level of regulation might help. But at the end of the day, Rick talks about scrolling through hundreds and hundreds or even thousands of Twitter messages and stuff like that. I don't even think I've ever used Twitter, to be honest. I believe I have an account, but I've never really used it. I don't know when Instagram. When I had to start, get an Instagram account, like it just followed from Facebook, and I've never used that either. I think I've got like 3 pictures on there or something, and that's it. So for me, I'm not really a social media kind of guy. I've never really used it. I don't really use LinkedIn. I've got a profile there, but I don't really use it. And Facebook, I really only just use because it's a calendar to remind me when it's someone's birthday.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That's kind of about it.
Just really quickly, because there were several, but I'm going to mention 2 legends that recently passed away, and one of them was out of the world of sports, and is known as something that I think you can have this label as well, and everything, Shaquille, and maybe even to some degree Rick, and now definitely Nick can have this label. But one of the things that Dikembe Mutombo was known as was a NBA legend, but also a global ambassador, as he was playing in the NBA, and it came from one of the African nations. I forgot which one it was, but he died at 58, and also Chris Christopher.
Yeah, he wasn't that old, Mark.
He was 58.
Yeah, certainly for a young.
Brain cancer. It was, it's
Really?
bad as shit.
Okay. 58. Wow.
So the
that's
culture keeps
young.
reminding us that my wife and me, that we're old as hell. So Chris Christopherson passes away. All the people we like. Springsteen just turned 75. So it's an unwelcome reminder that we're old as heck.
Yeah, but what about what about what's his name? I'm always go mental blank on his name. The guy from the Rolling Stones. He's a heavy smoker, heavy drinker. He's obviously done lots of drugs. He looks like he's about 600 years old. Keith Richards. He looks like he's about 600 years old, but he's still going strong somehow.
Well, Mick Jagger still looks good. Mick Jagger's dad was a PE teacher. Mick Jagger exercises a lot. He stays in good shape, which is weird because he's supposed to have a dissolute lifestyle, but he does. 50th anniversary premiere of SNL. Another thing, because I remember I was in high school when it came out, and it's been on for 50 years now. Last night we got to see who was going to play all the people in the election. Jim Gaffigan is Tim Walz. Dana Carvey came back to play Biden. Maya Rudolph is Harris. It was fun.
It sounds like it was fun. Hey, speaking of fun, and you kind of alluded to it, Shaquille, earlier, social media is a big part of a lot of people's lives, not necessarily yours, because like you said, you're not that active in everything, but you also sometimes hear these sad stories, because as we were ending economics, we talked about the weather and how it impacted North Carolina, and in Asheville, North Carolina, more than 1,000 miles from the deadly destruction brought by Hurricane Helene, there was a young lady named Jessica Dry Turner who begged on Facebook for someone to rescue her family members stranded on their rooftop in Asheville, North Carolina, surrounded by rising floodwaters. She said they were watching 18-wheelers and cars floating by. Turner wrote in an urgent Facebook post on this past Friday, but in a gut-wrenching follow-up message, Turner said help had not arrived in time to save her parents, both in their 70s, and her 6-year-old nephew. The roof unfortunately collapsed, and those 3 drowned. So she was actually trying to use social media for a good purpose and get somebody to rescue her family, but unfortunately, that rescue did not.
Well, I think there's lots of things with social media that's great. One of them is the tagging yourself that you're safe.
Right.
So, I was actually on a plane out of Sydney Airport, and the pilot came on and said, ladies and gentlemen, or passengers, whatever he said, please don't be alarmed. Everything's okay. And so, of course, everyone's gone, oh no, what's happened, And he said, you're going to see a whole heap of sirens and a whole heap of fire brigades and everything. There hasn't been a plane crash. It's just a precautionary measure. Don't worry. And, of course, all of us turned our phones on and quickly tagged ourselves as safe just in case something had actually happened on the tarmac. It turned out that all that happened was one of the engines had stalled on the plane on the runway, and they had to go out and get it and, take all the passengers off the plane and all that sort of stuff. But things like that come in very handy. And when the Vegas shooting happened, I had a friend of mine who was in Vegas who was actually coming to Australia to see me a couple of days later. And how I actually found out there was something wrong was because I got a message notifying me that she was safe. And I went, oh, what happened? So I think, tools like that can come in quite handy. I think that the harm to somebody like Rick is probably not as great as the harm that can befall young people, especially very young people who are using social media, who may end up being bullied and things like that. But I assume that Rick's probably thick-skinned enough to you can say whatever you want.
I got all my bullying back in the 70s. I got all my bullying in person from like gym teachers and students. Yeah.
Well, exactly. But I think people, especially young people, they think, well, my whole life's over. It's on the internet. Everything that I say and do is going to be memorialized forever. And you can go to YouTube and you can watch, videos of someone being a Karen or someone doing this, or, the libtards of TikTok and all these sorts of things. And, it could be just somebody having a bad day. Somebody's a bit stressed out about something. They've snapped and they've let it out on someone, which, I've been known to do. And you don't want that memorialized forever. So, it can be harmful in some ways to people, but I think my main concern with government trying to get too involved is that, government doesn't do a very good job of this stuff. And you end up with things like the misinformation bill, which is coming through the Australian political system at the moment. Nobody in Australia wants it. And like on the surface, it kind of, you could make an argument that it seems okay. I don't make that argument, but I can see where some people are coming from. But it just ends up curtailing too much free speech. And I think that this is the worry when we ask for tech companies to respond to a social problem, or if we ask government to step in, then, we can end up giving up a lot more of our freedoms in order to have a sense of security and safety over a minor issue.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
You're muted. You're muted, Rick. Rick, you're muted.
Well, hopefully
We can't hear you, Rick. You're muted.
Hopefully Rick will get unmuted. But along those same lines, Shaquille, he might be doing something and everything. It is good when we see the opposite of what I just mentioned with the Facebook post, because there is a hero of civil rights that a lot of people were concerned about over the weekend as well, because they were afraid, and apparently she's got some health issues, that she could have suffered a horrible fate, but it has now been found that she was found. So anybody that knows civil rights knows the name Medgar Evers, and definitely there was the granddaughter that was missing for 5 days, and definitely there was a nationwide attention that the Georgia NAACP brought to the case, but now they have found this person, and all along those lines. So a lot of people are glad that she was found and that some harm did not come to her, knowing the history of Medgar Evers and some of the other civil rights.
If I can quickly say, so when I was in the United States, every time I've come to the United States, but I remember the very first time it happened, I was actually in North Carolina, right there in your hometown for you and Toby. And all of a sudden my phone just started like buzzing, and it said like alert, emergency alert. And I was like, what is this? And it was an Amber Alert. And I wasn't first of all, I had never come across one before, but also I wasn't expecting one because I don't have a US phone. I'm obviously roaming on my Australian phone.
Right.
And then I sort of looked up how this could happen. It's basically the network providers that sent it out to all the phones in that area, which I think is a phenomenal thing to be able to do. I hope that they can start to include, picture MMSs and things like that as well. But that would also be a good way of being able to, get information out about somebody who's missing by being able to, get that through to people's social media very quickly. So there's a lot of uses for it, but I just would err on the side of caution if we let government get too involved.
There's Amber and Silver Alert here in North Carolina. Silver is for
another good thing that social media does is it lets people hook up. Like when I was a kid trying to get laid as a teenager and in my 20s, you had to go to bars, or maybe you'd meet somebody at school or work, but your reach was limited, and you had to be traditionally attractive or else somehow charismatic. And now you can, on the internet, you can find your people, and people who couldn't get laid 50 years ago, 40 years ago can get laid, but social media is so addicting that people are getting laid less because they'd rather type than go to So
Rick, I've heard about people getting depressed from dating apps like Tinder. Now, I've never used any of these sorts of things, but people tend to want the most attractive person. And so if you're not getting any swipes and your best mate is, well, I would argue that that's probably the same as if you go to the bar and your mate's getting all the girls and you're not getting any. Again, I haven't been in that position, I'm afraid, but, I can imagine that would be not a pleasant experience.
But Tinder's not your only option.
But Rick,
I don't know, Rick, because I don't use these things. If you're married, so you shouldn't be using them either.
No, hold on a second. But isn't the flip side of that there are several folks that if they are using those sites, whether it's whatever they are, you just mentioned Tinder, I'm sure there are other ones as well, including eHarmony and all along those lines, and they are getting what folks used to call catfished and everything, and there are people pretending to be who they are not, and they're having these lovely conversations, and then they find out that it's some dude from Afghanistan. And I just picked Afghanistan as a random country and everything. But
Nigeria normally.
No, we're not trying to make Afghanistan look bad. But I want to make a comment that I have met probably in the past year or so many people who have met someone that they now genuinely love, are married to, are very happy with, majority of them, their second marriage, but far more happier because they met online on some dating app. And I just find it hard to believe. But I mean, some of them said, it took several attempts, several dates. Others said it was, a few and done. But I think there's pros and cons, and you just have to be very careful. Trust no one, first off. Trust no one. But I've seen the catfishing through a friend of mine who was trying to, find somebody via online, and she got catfished a few times. So just be careful. Don't open up to anyone 100% and tell them your whole life either. I mean, it's.
But I don't think there's anything wrong with actually trying to develop those, friendships that can turn into something more, actually in person. I mean, I dated a few girls when I was in Switzerland, when I thought I was actually moving over there. Almost went on a date with this girl, and it was only because of COVID, and I couldn't, with this beautiful girl in Monaco, who, I absolutely adored her. So I think that, look, if you can find love online, hey, go for it. I do hope, as I think Rick is alluding to, that people don't just sit there and think, well, interacting with people is too hard in person. I'm socially awkward. I'm this and all of that. So I'll stick to online, and then all it ends up being is just an online, conversation, and it never really leads to anything. Or if you do go on a date, you don't have the interpersonal skills because all of the deep and meaningful conversations you've had have been online. So, there's some challenges there, but I hope people get past it.
Speaking of challenges, I want to bring up another media thing that is going to bring up politics as well. So I was going to bring it up on the news show, but I forgot to and everything. But
you're scared Ghibli away when you mention politics.
Since you're here and everything, I was just wondering your thoughts around this idea of, speaking of catfishing, of kind of like taunting people. Because one of the things that took place is Trump went to a very major football game, because there is no doubt that the Alabama-Georgia rivalry is a big rivalry, and he was sitting there in the stands, and apparently in her wisdom, Kamala Harris decided to fly a plane, basically taunting him into a second debate, and all along those lines, basically challenging him with one of those big planes that are sometimes used even in the dating space to like create dates and all along those lines. But she basically was saying, hey, why aren't you going to take me up on this second debate, and flew one of those planes across the screen as a way to taunt him and everything. So any idea around
that? I wasn't aware that happened, but great move from Kamala Harris. Absolutely. That's a fantastic move from her. Look, I know that there's apparently some footage of Tim Walz flipping the bird at some college kids that were yelling out USA, or yelling out they love Donald Trump. But yeah, for Kamala Harris to sort of needle at him a little bit, I think that's absolutely reasonable. It'll be very interesting to see what happens with that debate tomorrow between Walz and JD Vance. I don't know that's going to have much of an effect on the election, as I've been saying for a while now. I think people have pretty much already made up their mind. I think those people, as the poll that was on our previous show had said, that a lot of people that say they're undecided secretly are already decided. So, how much viewership is there going to be on that? I mean, people like us that will probably sit back and watch it, but I imagine that most people aren't going to sit back and watch, two VPs debate stuff. I think this is kind of already. I don't think much will change as far as voting patterns between now and the election.
Yeah. What you think, Rick?
Trump had a very Trumpy weekend, saying like some very unhinged stuff, and yeah, it won't lose him any of his hardcore followers, but you have to wonder about independence when he starts talking. Some people are calling it crystal knocked. Some people are calling it the purge, where he said that you could solve crime in America under him. He's just going to have one day of violence, and then we'll take care of it.
Rick, I think you got to put it in perspective, right? He's at a rally. His rally goers love all that sort of talk. That's who he's playing at. I don't think he's saying those sorts of things in the hope that he's going to entice independents to him. He's saying that just to, rile up his base. He says these sorts of things. The other thing too that I think is worth remembering, just like the Tim Walz thing that I just brought up, that depending on what media you're looking at, they'll take a little snippet of something that happened, and then that's what you see. So his rallies go on. I've actually watched one of his rallies. I don't know why. I watched one of his rallies, and these are pretty long, drawn out events. And so to take one thing that he said out of that and then amplify that and put it through the media, again, I don't think it changed anything, because it's baked into the cake, and people already know what they're getting with Donald Trump. They either love him or they hate him, and people aren't changing their mind, I don't think.
But liberals get pissed off because he says stuff that would get any non-Trump candidate canceled.
Yeah, well, I mean, the
So
whole
I wanted to actually, sorry, if I could just quickly say, I wanted to bring this up with you, Rick, actually, because I was having a chat over the weekend with very good friends of mine, and I actually mentioned you. So I got this, got this friend of mine in California, and he says he's a liberal, and I say I'm a liberal, but we seem to differ a bit on some issues. I think we're pretty close on a lot, but we sort of differ on some things. And the guy said, yeah, just remember though that you're a European Australian liberal. He's an American liberal. And I thought that probably explains a lot of where we agree and where we don't agree between the sort of classical liberal ideas and the American left-right dichotomy, which is a bit different to Europe and other countries. So just thought I'd mention that to you.
Right. If somebody from the U.S. on Twitter has classical liberal in their profile, that means they're a MAGA.
Well, yeah, that's what's interesting, because liberalism in Europe is kind of centre-right. Liberalism in the US is centre-left. But when I first came to the United States, I looked at the Democrats and went, gee, they're very right-wing, aren't they? When I first got there, Obama was the president. And so I was like, and even like when I looked at Bill Clinton's policies, right, I was like, their centre-left parties are kind of quite on the right just because America's so different. So then when I talk about issues in Australia, where I talk about, hey, we can't let people not have enough resources to feed themselves and clothe themselves, and they need to have housing and all that sort of stuff, everyone goes, you must be spending too much time in California these days, Shaquille, you're turning into a lefty. But that's actually a bit of a change where we believe that resources should be fairly allocated. I think that's why there's a lot of, not confusion, but there's some cultural differences between how we look at things. But I will still maintain that on the economic issues, I'm going to always
that this is
lower
a
taxes,
social
lower regulations.
media show. I want to show one of the biggest controversies of people taking pictures of something and making it interpret what they think it is, and that was when this person was. Let's see if I can. I'll have to take this. But if you look at this. There you go. Sometimes things are not as they appear to be from the media. So be very careful before you accuse someone of doing things that media is trying to manipulate your minds to believe.
I have to say that I prefer Billy Boy over there to actually flip the bird to someone.
When he actually was implementing laws to make things better for babies. So just be very careful. Thank you. I got to run because I got another show. But Mark,
I know you got another show, but I got a quick question for you before you run. Because one of the things I was going to ask you, Angela, because both of you are parents, I think Rick's a parent too, and everything, but parents and caregivers, if your child is on social media, there is some new research about child sexual assault and its connection to social media. So apparently the American Academy of Pediatrics released this on their conference on this Sunday, and it's about 7% of kids between the ages of 10 and 18 who were treated for sexual assault at a California hospital between 2018 and 2013 met their attacker through social media, and the average age was 13, and 89% of them were girls, while about 80% of the perpetrators were adult men. So I just wanted y'all's thoughts about this kind of research and everything, because it does look like we might need to be concerned about some of our young people and what they might be looking at online.
Well, this has been going on ever since online started, and before social media was implemented, you had sexual predators on emails, you had sexual predators everywhere. So I think sexual predators are everywhere, and if we want to get to the root of the problem, we need to eliminate them. And there are various ways to do that, but we used to use honeypots to lure them and catch them. I don't know if they do that anymore, but it's just so much broader with
what's that guy from, is it Chris Hampton from To Catch a Predator? Yes. I think he still has a show where he does that.
They had to pull it back a little bit because guys were killing themselves after they.
No, that was that one guy, I think, in Texas, but that I think got his NBC show cancelled, but then he's gone off and done his own online one. But look, you're only going to catch a certain amount of people doing that. I think you may have to actually, create the rules that parents do have access to their children's social media so that they can
If
read
they
through
don't,
things.
there's a problem. There's a problem
Yeah,
if you
okay, but
allow your
that's where
child to have social media without your control. There's a huge problem. It's
but
just
that's where I'm saying I think that perhaps if you're going to make some changes to regulations or what you're going to have the tech companies do, perhaps it is to give the parents ability to be able to read messages and things like that. Most parents, I think, want to give their kids some level of autonomy, but obviously there's a massive risk factor there. And I mean, unless the 13-year-old girl is, getting somebody around her own age group, the idea that a grown man is going to be with somebody who's so young. And 13, what are we talking about? That's like sixth grade.
I mean, look
So
at Epstein and Diddy and all of these other people who've been luring children and
yeah, but
raping
I doubt
and
that
stealing
Diddy
their
was
lives.
doing
I
it.
mean, we've
I
got a
doubt Diddy was doing it
problem.
through social media, though, right? Diddy was doing it because he
Right.
was
Well, and
really
I think that they
powerful.
did the same thing. They lured the people in through their social media accounts. And I believe, and I saw a lot of this many years ago where people were utilizing AI to lure
I'll send it
children
to
and
him.
young girls to be in that. But social media can be, really bad when it comes to that kind of stuff. And I just think that I am a firm believer, unfortunately, that majority of the sexual trades and problems that we have are involving a lot of government people. And that's why we haven't fixed the problem. So
Well, don't post it online because
I'm
then everyone else will join it.
That does.
I've
But along
texted,
those same
I've
lines,
texted it to Adam.
I want
I'll
to talk
take care
to
of it.
this
I'll
point.
text it
Let
to
me
him.
talk to this point for a
I
second.
got
So it changes what the facts of life are, what the birds and the bees are, what you have to talk to your kids about. In addition to explaining how sex works and who has what part, you also have to explain that about sexual exploiters, and what might seem harmless to you as a 13-year-old is really sinister and insidious.
So Rick, but the thing is, right, that well, I won't say everybody, I'll just say me, right? You begin to want to experiment with, the girl in class is, beginning to look a bit more attractive than she did a few years ago and stuff like that. You begin to want to experiment, and I think most people experiment with their own peer group. Now, some kids are left out of that. They try to get it from elsewhere. And I remember being back in like year 9 and talking to this girl. It turned out she actually went to the same school as me, out of like just miraculous coincidence. And she was a year 8 kid. Nothing ended up happening, but I think that people, young people are sort of caught in the middle of all of this. And just on your comment about teaching them about body parts and what's used where and all that sort of stuff, that's not the way sex ed is being delivered right now, because all this other stuff is being delivered, which is very confusing to them. So, what do you think?
Hold on a second, but she feels along those same lines because we're going to start a show with a young lady, and she's going to mention it on the show. So I'm not speaking out of school and everything. Called Ladies Let's Talk. It's a ladies program that'll hopefully launch this coming Sunday and everything along those lines. If not next Sunday, but she literally was a grandmother. She's a grandmother of 11, and she is in her early 50s, 52. She was a child bride. And yes, this was a woman that is, I think, of mixed heritage and everything, but she literally had her first baby, who is now 30-something, when she was 14. So definitely that is something on in our
okay, but look,
other cultures, but I'm talking about what happened here.
Okay, but look, let's hold up a second. Firstly, this was a lot more common, a few generations ago than what it is today. Society has changed. Secondly, I am absolutely stunned at the amount of states in the United States that actually still say this is legal. I don't get it. I don't understand. And we've actually seen, I think it's, someone can fact check me on this, I think it's either 50 girls or 200 girls that were like 10 that were marrying guys over 30. Now, I'd like to know what the circumstances are that leads to a judge signing off on that, because I don't get it. And here we are in a lot of the international agencies that the US is part of, advocating for girls, not brides, around the world, and yet we're allowing it in our own Western countries. I just totally don't understand how this has been allowed to happen. I think it's too young. I'm cognizant that may not necessarily have been the case 50 and 100 years ago. It may not necessarily be the case in some countries and cultures, but it ought not be happening in our own. Welcome
But
to the
Adam,
show, Adam.
I want to
Thank
ask
you.
Adam something because Adam's here with us and everything. And I know that Adam is a professor. I've got a friend that's a professor, and he's actually now, not you, Adam, but another friend is dating a young lady that is probably 20 to 25 years his junior and everything along those lines. So I guess the question becomes, at one point, does it become a danger point and everything along those lines? They're in a similar field and all along those lines. They're in the entertainment game in that space. But I know that he's older than me, so he's got to be in his mid-60s and everything. And I want to say his
But
lady in her early 40s.
if Rick Rosner decided to date me, I don't think there's a problem if I'm consenting to it. If I want to date someone who's 20 years younger than me, I don't think there's a problem, right? Because that's legal and they're adults. But if we're talking about someone who's 30 dating someone who's 20 or 25 years younger than them, that's not okay. Like, we have rules. We as a society have said that this is not acceptable. Like, no, like, you can't do that.
Because I know that could be an issue for professors. I know that Adam is a very disciplined guy, a very moral guy, and everything like that. But there are professors that sometimes get tempted by some of their younger students. I'm sure you've seen that, Adam.
I think one thing we have to keep in mind is this. Mary Kay Letourneau was 33 years old when she began dating her 12-year-old student. And those two were in love. And what happened? Mary Kay Letourneau was put in prison for 7 years. And when she was released, they got married. They had 2 beautiful children. And he was by her bedside when she died of colon cancer at the age of 53. Who are we to say why these people shouldn't have been allowed to pursue a relationship? We have these moral norms. Okay, he was 12 and she was 33. But one thing he will tell you is that he was a very mature 12 and he loved her, and nobody should stop them from being in a relationship. That's why after 7 years, he was still there. They got married and had 2 kids, and he is not receptive to anyone telling him that that was wrong. I'm not saying I embrace that. I'm not saying I endorse it. As a professor, I would never have a relationship with a student. But it does cause you to question the assumptions that you have regarding when is the proper age, when is age difference too much. I say, I'm glad they got married, and I'm not going to butt into their business because, you know what? The fact that he married her after she got out of prison for 7 years and they had a family together is a testament to their love, and she had a beautiful wedding dress at their marriage ceremony.
Hey,
But that's an exception rather than the rule, Adam. And if hang on, that's an exception rather than the rule, right? I think that many of these young people, especially girls, find themselves trapped in a situation. But just from a practical perspective, I don't know how this would work. If you're 30 and you've got a 12-year-old girlfriend or a 12-year-old wife, like, what do you do? I've got a Friday night, your friends invite you out the bar, and you're like, oh, no, I can't. I've got to watch my wife in the school play. I mean, it just, like, how would this work? What would you talk about? There'd be nothing, like, what would you have in common? This is just,
you got to have some common.
I don't get it. I'm sorry. I don't get it.
I agree with you. Like you said, it's the exception rather than the
But,
rule. But
like,
it
12,
is
we're
the
talking
rare
like-
exception. So why
We're
should
talking like
sending her
6th
to
grade.
prison?
We're talking like middle school here.
No, that's
I
middle
know.
school. No, but hold on a second, because I got a quick question.
I
for
have a
Sasha.
question for Adam on this story, and it just pertains to precedents at this point. But would you say that because people meddle in situations like this so much and condemn it, that there have been maybe others, true love stories that could have existed later in life that didn't because of the shaming that goes on?
Yes, because I was in one of them, so I can relate. And I will reject anybody who tells me that the person that I was in that relationship with, although I was very young and she was much older, was not a consensual one and was not one where we truly respected and loved each other and were still friends. Shaquille is right. It is the rare exception. But having been in that same position, I can tell you that I was certainly of sound mind and body to make that decision, and I reject anybody who's going to pass moral judgment. So the rare exception it is, but should it have universal condemnation? No. And Jatovi, shouldn't you be on the campaign trail for Kamala Harris right now?
Hold on a second. He'll tell you about the campaign trail later, but I've got a question for Shaquille, for Sasha really quick, and I did see your hand raised. Sasha, there was another media story that was in the news recently and everything, and it
Well,
actually.
hang on, before you change the topic, why don't you let Rick respond to what was being
I'm gonna
discussed?
let him respond, and I'm gonna give him. I had a quick question because I had this question before you made that dig, Adam, and everything.
It was not a dig; it was a joke.
I know it was, but my question for you, Sasha, is there was a young lady that is in Russia, and I know how you feel about the Russians and everything, that apparently has got 22 children. She's already got 22 children, so she's already like of some massive mother and everything. But she has pledged that she, before she dies, wants to have 100 children. I don't even know if that's biologically possible, but she has said that she wants to have 100 children and all along those lines. So this is a very serious news story that I have seen where she has said.
All right. So that's
She
just
can
one-
adopt.
All right. So the
She said she
deal.
wanted naturally, Kim.
So we live in a pornographized society, and you have to talk to kids. You know, you've got the power differential and the sophistication differential, and you got to talk to kids about how what looks harmless in breaking some of these norms can do psychological damage because people's sex stuff is hardwired into their brain. Louis C.K. liked to jerk off in front of female rookie comedians. Nobody was.
They agreed to go to his room, though, Rick.
Right, but hold on. Let me finish my thing.
Yeah.
Nobody was physically hurt. The jizz didn't. That was, but it destroyed them for comedy because sex is so central to our identities that if you mess with somebody sexually, even in something as seemingly trivial as that, it wrecks people. And
Well,
kids,
I don't think. I think that is so overblown. I can't see that wrecking somebody at all. I mean, everybody's been on, Pornhub or something and seen all this sort of stuff. I think that's ludicrous. The claims that were made against him. I do want to address something.
it's a violation
Because
of
I've had. Hang on a second. So I do address that because I've had a similar experience. I won't go into as what Adam's described. And in my particular case, the poor thing thought that I was older than she was because I'd lied and had fake ID and all sorts of other things. But we do have to be practical, right? So, a lot of countries have these Romeo and Juliet rules. California is one of those places that just blows my mind because it doesn't. And here you have, California, as you keep describing all the porn and all the stuff that goes on in California, and yet the age of consent's 18. So that a senior at high school going to prom could be taking his, girlfriend to the prom as the date, who's 3 months younger than him. He's 18, she's 17, 9 months. One thing leads to another, and next thing you know, he's on the sex offenders registry. That makes no sense to me. I mean, I can understand wanting to discourage, teenage behavior, but, the teenage years is the horniest years of your life and also the most experimental years where nothing really matters. And I think that criminalizing young people for this sort of behavior is not the solution.
So people should know what a Romeo-Juliet rule is, which is if you're within 2 years of each other.
Well, it depends. It depends on the country. Some countries are 4 years, et cetera, et cetera.
Rick, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So, Rick, I'm assuming that you went to school when you were young, right?
Right.
I would bet that when you were 12 years old, that if you had sex with the hot blonde social studies teacher,
I would have loved it. I would have loved it.
Exactly. You wouldn't have been psychologically harmed. I don't buy that for 1 second. And I'm not just saying that about you. I'm saying that about the majority of 12-year-old men.
Hey,
Yeah,
Adam,
okay.
Yeah, what about 12-year-old girls? What about 12-year-old girls and, the stereotypical creepy older guy?
It's different because of the power dynamic that exists between a man and a woman.
But also imagine some society of the future where
I have a question for Adam.
But so Adam, to play your analogy though, so if the 12-year-old boy that you've deemed to, I can't believe we're having this conversation, the 12-year-old boy that you've deemed to be mature enough happens to have a twin sister who is the same level of maturity, and they both want to go for older people, you'd be saying what? That the 12-year-old boy is able to do it because he's mature enough, but the 12-year-old girl isn't? To use
No, I
your
would
that's
say-
not
I would
something
say
I'm
that they-
advocating for, but that's your position, is it?
I would say that they both can do it, but the risk of harm to the female is somewhat greater than it is to the male.
You
Yeah,
can
quick
get a
question.
girl
Hold on a second,
pregnant at 12, and to me that would be very
Now,
detrimental.
I'm not advocating for the age of consent to be 12. Let me be clear. I'm just saying that there are exceptions.
I do want to add something to some of the storytelling that we're doing here is that a lot of young teens would, during the prom, sneak across the border here in North Carolina to go to South Carolina to get married. And my husband's family being some of those people who did that, very, very young teenagers. In today's time, you would go, oh my God, they're crazy. But every one of those marriages that I'm aware of lasted until death do they part, like literally every one of them. And so I think, there's a lot to be said about when you fall in love with that first person and you make a commitment right away and you didn't have any other relationships. But in today's time, we make people wait, or we encourage them to wait. They, date a lot of different people. I think it gets very complex and confusing, I think there's pros and cons in both of it.
What would you say?
If you feel that way, why don't you feel the same way about the transgender issue? Why don't you feel the same way about puberty blockers being given out to these 12-year-olds?
I don't want to date anybody else because it was perfect, and I don't want to go through all the drama that people go through. So I think that there's some pros and cons. It's just, a matter of what's in your heart.
You have a
child. Why don't you find that same thing to 12-year-olds that want to go on puberty blockers? The 12-year-olds that want to go on puberty blockers, you don't think that's a problem, but you say this is crazy.
Kim, you have a son, right?
I have several kids.
Okay, so let's say that your son, when he was 7 years old, came to you and said, I'm in love with Jamie, and she's 8, and we want to get married. Why should we prohibit them from getting married?
No, I'm just saying that underage, yeah.
I mean, what's wrong with saying a 7 and 8-year-old can't get married?
Actually, that did happen. It did. Happen.
It's based on a real example. This is a real world example. I'm not I'm not advocating for it.
I had both kids come to me and tell me that they were madly in love, but that, and that they were going to get married. Of course, as they got older, that changed. I don't know what changed other than maybe their classes separated.
Adults make horrible choices. Why don't we let the kids get married?
Adam,
I sat down and asked them just questions. Nothing, but I took it serious. And, and I asked them questions of, why do they feel this way? Well, what do they feel like that love is? And, I'm so happy that they found someone that they can love that much, that they would want to spend the rest of their lives with them. And, what's funny is they became best friends. I think they still are. So I have dealt with it. I even dealt with it when our boys were in their teens and came home and said, I give my heart, my soul, and the rest of my life to her. I'm like, oh my God.
Well, do you know the rate of sexual intercourse among 10-year-olds?
I'm certainly glad I never got
they would be allowed to get married.
No,
I'm certainly glad I never got to marry the first girl I ever kissed when I was 5 years old. I can tell you that right now.
But Adam, really quickly, there is a part of this conversation.
Good eyes happen all the time. You just have to address it.
Adam and Kim, there's a part of this conversation that I am surprised when I hear that it is not as illegal as I would think it would be, because it is very common to the dating world and everything along those lines. Been movies about it and everything, but I understand it's illegal if you're doing it with children. But Adam, it's my understanding that sexting is actually illegal. I mean, legal for most people if it's adults consenting and all along those lines.
That's correct. But my question is, how could you look 2 10-year-olds in the eye and say they can't get married? Why are you discriminating against them? Why do you think you know better than they do?
Why are we even talking about
I never said they couldn't. Have you ever done mock marriages for little kids?
They allow it in Iraq. They allow it in Iran.
They do these mock weddings. I've seen them. But anyway, I have to run, guys.
Do we want to be emulating Iran and Iraq?
I love y'all. Be safe. It's dangerous out there.
I want to go back to the 12-year-old. I mean, 12-year-old.
Jacoby answered the question.
Hold on. Wait. Come on. I want a 12-year-old boy banging his teacher. One problem is it's secret. It's built out of lies. They're meeting secretly. They're banging in her SUV. In some kind of society where if you want to make that like an acceptable thing if the people are mature enough to do it. It has to be with the full knowledge of the families involved, which sounds weird.
But Rick, hang on. Look, I don't see. This is not an argument I even want to make because it's not the position that I have. But if you're going to have that position and you're in California, if the teachers can have the kids start puberty blockers and start calling them by different names and all this sort of stuff and go down this crazy, insane transgender stuff at that age without their parents knowing about it, which is what California is pushing for, I think I'd prefer, if I have a child, I've got nieces and nephews, I think I'd prefer to know they're banging the teacher than the irreparable harm that the puberty blockers would cause.
Exactly.
So I think the science is changing, I believe, on puberty blockers, where it used to be that I took scientists' opinion that it didn't cause any problem, that it just gave you a timeout without causing any. I think that's
Rick,
changing. I think.
But Rick, the thing is that the science never actually said that. What happened? This is why I keep talking about.
The science did.
No, I know they told you that, and this is what I keep talking about. I'm so frustrated and annoyed with universities and colleges around the Western world because what they've done. Further, when people start talking about this with climate change, it's been going on for ages. What they're doing is, if you want to get a research grant, you have to say what you're going to do, and then you get given the money to do it. Now, if you come up with a result that they don't like, it might interfere with your ability to get another grant. So you have to produce science that shows whatever the thing is right now. The dissenting scientists' views were quashed. So they would sit around, they'd say, hey, look, we've got the science that proves this thing. It never did. And worst of all was that when the rest of us got up and said, I've got a problem here, this doesn't sound so good, it was shut up, bigot, you're a Trump-supporting racist, homophobe, transphobe, blah, 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 blah. I'm a white supremacist. The amount of times I've been called a white supremacist is beyond, I don't get it. So, this is the sort of stuff that would happen. So it's not that the science ever supported this. It's that the dissenting opinions were silenced. And it's the same thing with climate change. It's the same thing with a number of other issues.
I'll argue with you about climate, but when it comes to like the puberty blockers, like I didn't do much research. It doesn't impinge on me very much. I've got no trans people that I'm responsible for. It's just and 99.99% of the population 10 years ago didn't have any either. But I took scientists' word for it, and yes, sometimes that's not going to. So, Rick, if you've taken scientists' word for it, and now you see that the science is not what they said, and not what big media has said, and not what everybody's been saying, why aren't you incensed and just going, I'm sick and tired of being lied to? Because that's the reason why everyone says to me that I've moved too far to the right. Because I'm fed up of being lied to by the powers. Because I know the history of science. I've taken classes in the history of science, and people can be, including scientists, can be very wrong. One, like there's a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And one trend pointed out in this book is that when you come up with a new, better theory, you can't convince the old guys that your theory is really better. You have to wait for them to die. So scientists have I don't entirely believe in Big Bang theory. It's our first big theory of the whole universe that conforms to evidence. Look at the rest of the history of our theories. Well, God would be the first theory that conforms to evidence. Scientists are wrong, and it's like the law. The law is shitty until you run a bunch of cases through the law, and over time you reach precedent, and you figure out how to do things right. You never want to go to court. God is the better theory, and I think a theory that predates the Big Bang theory, which is backed by evidence about how the universe started.
I mean, that's a whole.
Going back to Mary Kay Letourneau, I think the message to our young people should be something like this: don't be afraid to say, "Hey, please be my mate," even if you're only 8.
I like that, right? You're taking Toby and Sasha, any comments on this whole conversation? We only got 5 minutes to go, so
everyone knows I'm joking, but my point is that we should not be prohibiting people in some situations In rare exceptions, we should not be prohibiting people who are, 14 or 15. And now I'm being serious. We should not be prohibiting people who are 14 or 15 in rare situations from being married if they exemplify the maturity to make that decision, just like we don't prevent young people from having abortions when they are under 18. I'm not arguing for the age of consent to be 10 or 8. It's a joke. But you get my point that our laws regarding age of consent are certainly questionable and certainly don't take into account the individualized circumstances that some people sometimes find themselves in, and for which they deserve the liberty to get married.
But Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, though, just because there's two different things that you said there. So firstly, if the person who's 14 or 15 wants to get married, that's legal in a lot of places in the United States. Normally you need to go in front of the judge, and the judge signs off on it, and it's fine, right? But correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know this part of the law very well. I was under the impression that if a young person is emancipated, then they have the full rights of adulthood, including the right to enter into a marriage of contract of marriage.
Correct.
Is that correct? So that would also imply that they have the right to consent prior to entering into a contract of marriage.
Right. So if they're 12 years old, they have a right to get married in this country in some jurisdictions. And what I'm saying is that
outside of marriage, if they're emancipated, can they do what they want as an adult would be? Because that's what my impression of being emancipated would be.
In most circumstances. My only point is, look, I don't condone people getting married at 12 or 13, but I do believe there are rare circumstances in which we should allow that to happen if in those rare situations these individuals have the requisite maturity, like often you see with child actors or Olympic athletes, for example, who are 12 or 13. Why should we prohibit them and restrict their liberty by universally condemning this for generalization that has no basis in fact or evidence?
Because they're subject to exploitation by the people they work with who are more sophisticated than they are.
By someone their same age? Who they know?
You think like the gym coach or
no, I don't condone that. That should be illegal, of course.
No, but what you'd be suggesting is that Macaulay Culkin should have been able to marry Anna Chomsky, the actress from My Girl, in real life, because they were roughly the same age. Correct. If they both felt that was a commitment that they wanted to make.
Yes, the gym teacher having sex with the 12-year-old should be a felony. And they should go to prison.
And I agree with you on that. Sasha, and then if Joey's got last comments, then we're going to get ready to get out of here. Sasha.
I was present on Morning Edition. I was present on this show here. And you were talking about all kind of garbage except some very, very important things. No, I'm honestly saying it's a garbage now, and the World Edition, it was complete garbage. Something very important happened in the last few days. I'm talking about attack of Israel on Hezbollah and destroying its leadership. And that could tilt election in favor of Trump, because the position of Biden is extremely weak. He is neither here, he is neither there. He has to say very little, if anything. And obviously he failed in his goal to have some kind of peaceful solution here and there, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Israel, whether it's Palestine or Hezbollah. He failed everywhere, all the way. So this is something I would like to see some polls. I don't believe very much in any polls or anything, but we'll see. Also, surprisingly, I've seen a lot of suggestions that this year could be exception to the vice president debate tomorrow. This is one exception when it could tilt the election one way or another, and it could be could have very significant impact. Unfortunately, we didn't have any time to discuss it or any inclination to discuss it, but it is what it is.
We couldn't do it on World Edition, Sasha, because we had a guest on. I'm going on Joel Jamal's show for Turning Point Australia to do a live reaction to the debate. And you're right, that it could have an effect. I don't think it's going to have much, but it could. But the reason why it might have an effect is because the Democrats, in their wisdom, have decided that when all of America is saying, hey, we'd like to actually hear a little bit more about the specifics of the policies, and you've been ignoring us and refusing to do interviews and refusing to do news conferences, that this is one more chance for the Democrats to actually lay out their plan other than, hey, it's good vibes and Trump's bad.
But
You know
Shakir,
what I
what about the Republican plans? There are no plans from anybody. They are talking. Harris is a little bit more on the point. Here is 50,000 here. Here is 6,000 there. At least some numbers. From Trump, we haven't heard nothing at all.
So he can rest on his laurels and say, I'm gonna lower taxes and lower regulations. She's talking about introducing a tax on unrealized capital gains. She's talking about having a massive tax increase on the corporate rate of tax from 20 to 28%. She's talking about doing all sorts of things.
Okay, so your policies are not very good. Okay, but
but then she won't talk about them. She won't talk about what they're actually. How is she going to do anything? Then she says we've got a problem at the border. She finally goes down and visits the border for the first time in 3 years. What is she running for? She's for fracking. She's against fracking. For her to win the presidency, in my view, she owed it to the American people and to the rest of us around the world that are watching this nonsense to actually sit down and lay out what her vision is for the future of America, what's going to be different between her and Biden, if anything, and to compare and contrast her views with Donald Trump's, and she's failed to do that. So the reason why there's extra interest in the VP debate, which there normally isn't very much interest in this, is because of the fact that there are still people that are waiting to hear something more than vibes. She's been asked, how are you going to bring down inflation? Her answer is that she comes from a middle-class family. Even CNN has said that she's not answering the questions. MSNBC, somebody who was a shill for her, said that the problem is that she's not answering questions. So if left-wing media is saying it, it's not a right-wing talking point. It's the Democrats saying, you know what, we're not going to bother telling you anything, and we're just going to ride on the coattails of Trump is bad and Trump is terrible.
Well, let me just
I don't think that's going to be a successful campaign strategy. I could be wrong, but I don't think it will be.
If I could just make a couple of points. The first thing I'll say is I think that J.D. Vance was the worst possible choice that Trump could have made. Some of the statements he's made in the past is not going to ingratiate him to suburban women. Number two,
doesn't help Trump at all.
No, I don't think so.
But what Republican
Democrats
would help with suburban women? What Republican would?
A Republican that said that he's going to not support a federal abortion ban at the very least.
Nikki Haley.
Yeah, and I think number two, Democrats are brilliant at really turning out the vote and remaining unified in elections. Republicans still don't get it, and they are both divided within their own party and not as good at getting out the vote. That could make the difference for Harris. Right now, I couldn't tell you who's going to win the election.
Adam, I don't think Democrats are that great at that at all. They spent the entire lead up to the 2016 election crucifying Hillary Clinton and saying that everybody should vote for Bernie Sanders because of how bad a candidate she was. Then she becomes the nominee, and then they're surprised that people didn't vote for her. There's all sorts of turmoil within the Democrats right now that they're just ignoring, because as soon as somebody criticizes Biden, you're pearl clutching or you're bedwetters and all this sort of stuff, Democrats are unable and incapable of ever taking 1 ounce of criticism, whether it be from the right or whether it be from within their own ranks. The same as the Labor Party is here in Australia, the same as the Labor Party is and centre-left parties are in the UK and Canada. Any kind of criticism is ignored, it's covered up, they call your names, even if you're on their side. And I don't think that the turnout enthusiasm for Kamala and Walz is going to be high like they're banking on it being.
No, but
what's the chance of her getting the same sorts of numbers as what Biden did?
Okay, we got to wrap up because we got the other show, the timeshare show going on the other side and everything. But one thing that I'm going to add is that there has been criticism from the left. I also brought that up to Carl after our show and everything, and I told you that before, Shaquille, because we even saw that to some degree with the AOC and what's going on with Eric Adams. So yes, there have been criticism even within the Democratic Party itself and everything. So I will say.
Yeah, and what happens when there is? What happens if you're going to talk about Eric Adams? These charges are nonsense. He got a few flight upgrades. Come on now. Right? I mean, if you're talking about that dude in New Jersey, that's a bit different. He's got gold bars in his jacket pockets and all this sort of stuff. This Eric Adams stuff, there's no substance. Well,
the charges are ridiculous.
Even if
by
it
the
was
way,
true,
I was thinking
it's so minuscule and so tiny. But you know what I reckon it is? I reckon it's because he's criticised the Biden-Harris campaign for the immigration, for the fact that they've overloaded services in New York, so they're trying to get rid of him so they can get somebody who's even further to the left. That's why. And that's what Democrats do. They go after anybody who criticises them.
Okay, I was thinking about something about the previous garbage part of this show. I was thinking about what you overlook.
I like my garbage.
Okay, I'll tell you something. That this young girl, 12 10 years old or so, you underestimated their curiosity, their self-esteem, trying to prove their worthiness, that the young boys, or maybe not so young boys, are interested in them because of their beauty or their smartness or their other factors or so on. And they are sometimes are much more persuasive to pursue this relationship than the boys, because the boys, okay, so they want to get a girl out to have fun with her and so on. But the girls, they have much bigger goals, and you're underestimated there, and you're portraying them as victims, and they're just suffering because of this unscrupulous older man or so on. I think it's wrong.
All I'm saying is, don't be afraid to say I love you just because you're two.
Jacoby, on that note, do you have anything you want to add as we're heading out the door and everything you've heard a lot of this conversation? So, and you're not the only one.
Jacoby's mortified.
If you're 22, you're welcome to say that you love me. If you're 2, leave me alone.
Jacoby wants nothing to do with this crowd.
I'm going to give you a call, Adam. I think we're wrapping up the show. I'm going to give you a call.
Yeah. We're wrapping it up.
Remember, audience, we're joking. All right.
And on that note, we're going to get on out of here.
Great to see you all.
Good to see you.
Great to have you. Bye-bye.